Welcome to the Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. Our dedication to living life joyfully allows us to confront the reality of unmitigated deception and political denial of the harm caused by nuclear and chemical contamination. We demand an end to corporate control of science and suppression of facts for political and financial gain. We are not assets on a balance sheet. We must honestly work together to remediate damage to benefit our planet and humanity. Remember, happiness is resistance, and love is greater than fear. Join the Age of Fission radio show on Spreaker.com. Search for Lonnie Clark for all our podcasted shows. Podcasts are also on YouTube at nutzforart, nutzforart. Thank you for being part of the solution. Well, good afternoon to anybody who's joining us today. We really appreciate you joining in on our podcast. I decided to go live today. I actually put up a podcast about 5 minutes ago that was incorrect, and I messed up on setting up the speakers and all that stuff that I needed to have done. So this is to anybody out there who is really, and I just have to say, I admire my fellow citizens who are willing to face the truth and the reality of the life that we're living. I don't think any of us ever foresaw the gross intentional neglect perpetrated not just by the nuclear industry, but by the entire technology. John Goffman used to talk about that all the time. He used to say, I read several of his books. In fact, on my YouTube channel, I read several of his books. You know what I just realized, and this is because I'm not used to going live. I forgot to introduce myself. So I want to thank you for joining us. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show. And this is a show where I interview activists and I talk to people and I report on interviews. Next week, I'm actually going to be interviewing a young man that I met, and I'm super excited because I love to meet young activists. He's a climate activist. His name is Steve Repicki. It's kind of a weird name, but he's a climate activist. I met him at a KEPW fundraiser over the weekend, and I really want to discuss with him how can we get nuclear contamination into the conversation about climate change. So this brings me back to what I want to talk to you about today, because my show posts on KEPW, which is www.kepw.org, or if you're in Eugene and the Springfield surrounding area, it's 97.3 FM LP on the radio. It posts at 11 o'clock at night on Thursdays. So today is October 10th, 2019. And it is Thursday, and I thought I'd do a live podcast for tonight instead of pre-recording it and putting it up. I thought I'd do a live podcast here on Spreaker, and it will automatically post on my YouTube channel, my Facebook channel, my Twitter page, Spotify, iTunes, and iHeartRadio. I guess that's all of the places, and also here on Spreaker. So there's a lot of people who come to Spreaker. That's Spreaker. I think when you come to my Spreaker channel, though, you get bombarded with commercials. So I don't think there's anything I can do about that. I think that's just what happens. But I want to thank you for joining our little tiny podcast. I have been very double-minded for any of you who've been following me for the last 5 years. I've had the Age of Fission radio show on the internet for 5 years. It was on a channel called ucy.tv. And I have had the same format where I interview activists and report on nuclear news. In the last year, I've gotten very disheartened by the lack of, I guess, energy or the lack of interest in protecting ourselves. I mean, we're about to have the 2020 Olympics in Fukushima. I mean, it is stunning. In Itate, which is a city right outside, I think it's like 10 miles away from Fukushima, they're starting to make beer. They're having microbrews from Utate. And it's going to be imported here in the United States. So you can get your americium-laced beer, and people will think that americium is made an American additive. No, it's a nuclear contamination, folks. So, and these things do cause harm. It's not like this is small harm. This is big harm, big harm, kind of like the phosphates or the glyphosates and all that other contaminants. We hear about these mega lawsuits, right, where people can sue well, look, what happened with Johnson & Johnson? They just lost their big opioid case, right, where they're having to pay millions of dollars, millions. And every other industry except nuclear, we can get a positive judgment out of the judges. So how is it that the nuclear judges are all bought out? There was a case that is going through in Japan right now where the citizens have sued General Electric for the loss of their livelihood, and the judge sided with General Electric and said they didn't lose their livelihood because of the nuclear power plant blowing up. He determined it was because of the tsunami, which is kind of a false narrative, because if it hadn't been for the nuclear power plant blowing up, those people could have rebuilt their lives in Fukushima. I want to apologize to my voice. I have a bit of a cold, so there may be times when I will be muting the microphone in case I have to sneeze or blow my nose. So I just thought I'd give you the heads up on that one. So let me get right into the news that I do want to share with you today, because what prompted me to do this live was the news that I heard about North Korea. And as The Atlantic put it, and I found a really great article on this. It was written October 8th, a couple days ago, in the Atlantic magazine online. And the title says, "On North Korea, the chickens are coming home to roost. One of the downsides of highly personalized diplomacy is that when the person in question is debilitated, the diplomacy suffers." So I think what Kim Jong-un has seen is that you can easily intimidate Traitor Trump. You can easily get this guy to do what you want if you threaten him, because he is a coward and he doesn't like to challenge anybody face to face. So if you challenge him, he will back down. And that is what we have seen him do in his own businesses. I mean, remember, he bankrupted 4 companies or 5 companies. 5 times he went, I don't know, it's 5 companies, but his company bankrupted more than 4 times. I've heard 4, I've heard 6, but I mean, as a business owner who's never filed for bankruptcy, I don't see that as a business tool. I see that as a way of cheating everybody that you've been involved in business with. I think it's completely despicable, and he's bankrupting our country, not just financially, but emotionally. And we see that with his hate-filled tweets every day. So now Kim Jong-un has decided that, he is going to challenge Donald Trump, and he wants to start building his own nuclear facilities, and he wants to build his own nuclear missiles, and he wants to be a big important guy there. So the whole idea of denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula is kind of a fantasy, as we've all known from the very beginning, as if they were ever going to denuclearize, unfortunately. And I think that speaks to the whole issue. I don't think we're ever going to denuclearize. We have, many anti-nuke activist groups fighting against nuclear weapons. Have we even made a dent in stopping the nuclear industry? No. The answer is N-O. We have not made a single dent in stopping the nuclear industry. And I think it is actually kind of a planned event. I think that their intention is to harm humanity, bring us to our knees, so we'll do exactly what they say. I don't know if any of you guys ever saw that movie called Astro Boy. It's a cartoon movie, but it's definitely worth watching. It's about 10 years old. And I think they were kind of warning us about what they were going to do to us. Let me get to this article because it's really a good article. It talks. This weekend, for example, in a development that barely registered among the impeachment frenzy in the U.S., United States and Korean officials met in Sweden to revive nuclear negotiations. The talks have been stalled since the latest encounter between Trump and Kim. Of course, over the past year and a half, North Korea has not made any concessions other than a provisional halt in nuclear and long-range missile tests, the unverified destruction of the nuclear test site, and the vague commitment to the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. The setting was in the relatives to the surrounding of the Trump summits with Kim, dulled by design, a location meant to avoid symbolism and distraction so the teams can focus on the content of the negotiations, said Leif Erik Easley, a Korea expert at the Ewha Women's University in Seoul. Yet the talks also seem to be set up for failure. For months, North Korean officials delayed restarting these lower-level discussions, placing U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in the humiliating position of repeatedly promising that negotiations would resume in a couple of weeks. And when the North Koreans finally agreed to them, they announced that the talks would only last one day. Soon after, Kim's government announced that the successful test of a new submarine-launched ballistic missile, capping a spate of shorter-range missile tests that has significantly advanced its nuclear weapons arsenal. And fail they did, at least for a minute. In a statement read shortly after the negotiations ended, within hours of beginning, so shortly after, in fact, it raised suspicion that this was Pyongyang's plan all along. The chief North Korean negotiator, Kim Myong-gil, blamed the breakdown on these U.S. counterparts, not coming to the table with fresh ideas, and suggested that talks be suspended until the end of the year, a period that North Korean officials have ominously described as a deadline for Washington to adopt a more flexible position. So you see what Kim is doing? He is threatening the United States. Trader Trump likes these kinds of things. I genuinely believe we are in a very dire position right now, folks. We have what I consider to be the Chicago boys in full charge. They have literally perpetrated a soft coup on our country. And the Democrats, I don't know about this impeachment process. Nancy Pelosi declared impeachment and then sent everybody home for 2 weeks. So how important did that seem to her? Not very, because she wants to stay rich. I'm just dumbfounded. I have to say I am completely flabbergasted with the level of, I guess what you call it is privilege. Rich privilege, people who with wealth and money think they can make decisions to harm anybody they want at any time they want. You know, like the camps that Trump set up to torture the children, intentionally meant to harm women and children. The nuclear industry's intention is to harm women and children. That's their intent. This is not an accident, folks. So this whole thing about, this is quite a really magnificent article, to be honest, and I am not going to read the whole thing for you, but I would strongly suggest that you go online to www.theatlantic.com. Let me just end with reading the last paragraph. If the North Koreans do go back to testing early next year and we're still bound up in this political fight, how are we going to respond? The North Korean watcher asked. Once the North Koreans develop an intercontinental ballistic missile that can reach the United States and a hydrogen bomb they can mount it on, there will be a massive change in the balance of power in the Pacific. Everything gets cut loose. It may not be 24 hours afterward, but boy, suddenly the world is very, very different. Yes, it is. Yes, it will be. And, we know that North Korea is working diligently to become a really serious nuclear power. And it's not just towards the United States, it's also towards Japan. Imagine if they blew up a nuclear power plant. And Japan has how many? 22 nuclear power facilities? What if Kim Jong-un decided just to drop something on one of those closed nuclear power plants with all those spent fuel rods sitting there out in the open? I mean, we are talking about catastrophe beyond recognition. This is why I want to get the climate activists involved. I am very excited for next week's interview with Steve Repekiv. He's a climate activist. I met him. He actually goes around and gets people to sign petitions so we can actually begin to change the law. One of my goals is to get nuclear contamination put into the conversation of the climate collapse, which they call climate change, but it's actually climate collapse. The environment is collapsing. At the rate that the environment is collapsing, humans won't be able to live on it for another 30, 40, 50 years. That's what Guy McPherson talks about. He goes around the country. He's considered the professor of doom and gloom. You know, I interviewed him here on my show. You guys can look up those podcasts. But we're in a grave time. And I do this podcast, and I think it's the reason that KEPW posts my radio shows at 11 o'clock at night, because they consider it to be too grave to put during the day, which, I mean, I appreciate the fact that they're willing to put any nuclear shows, anti-nuclear shows on air, shows that actually tell the truth. You know, when I first got involved with this radio program, I was very adamant. I wasn't anti-nuclear. I was just science. I wanted real science, because one of the things I've discovered is that there really is a massive cover-up on the harm that nuclear contamination causes humanity and all life on the planet, and a massive cover-up on the disregard for that harm by the nuclear industry in order to promote its use, because it's such a freaking cash cow. It makes them boatloads of money. Carl Grossman has this book, and I've interviewed Carl on my show, and I hope you've listened to that podcast, because Carl Grossman is one of my idols. He wrote a book called Cover Up, What You're Not Supposed to Know About Nuclear Power. And you can get that for free on his website at www.carlgrossman.com. That's Carl with a K. And then you link on his page that says books. And then it says cover up sample. And it's not really a sample. It's the whole book, folks. It's a PDF of the book. But on page 117, for example, this is my hot wire because I live in the Northwest. It talks about how the Hanford tanks, where they've been pouring the plutonium from their plutonium processing plants, they had all this nuclear waste that they were, quote, storing in tanks there. So what they did was they built these big, gigantic, deep trenches and lined the sides of the walls, but they didn't line the underneath of the walls. So it was like an open pit, just with contamination to keep it from going into the side of the tanks, but they were allowing it to go into the groundwater. Yeah. So then they started to discover there was a lot of radioactivity in the Columbia River. And the tribes up there are all getting really sick. As usual, as on every single uranium mine all over the Pacific Northwest to all over the Southwest, where any native lands are, they have uranium mines, which is also another hot topic of mine, because uranium mines are really where they begin, right? It is, for me, I find it completely incomprehensible how any elected official like Peter DeFazio, who's my elected official, or Jeff Merkley, or Ron Wyden can go to work year after year after year and not do everything they can to stop nuclear contamination from destroying the beautiful, magnificent Northwest. Right now in the Northwest, we have a salmon shortage. The Soho salmon super dying off. And they're trying to say it's caused by climate change. No, it's not. The Columbia River is contaminated. That's the problem. From the Hanford dump site and from the Columbia generating station right there. They don't even test the animals coming out of that river for nuclear contamination because they know exactly what they're going to get. It is beyond comprehension. It literally is a crime against humanity. So rather than me just rant and rave about how hideous these people are, I definitely want to read to you. I went to the Superfund sites at the EPA because the EPA lists things as national priorities lists. We have Superfund sites and then we have fuse wrap sites. So you actually have to look for fuse wrap, formally utilized remediation application sites. I forget what's the blah blah. I forget what fuse wrap actually means. Let me see if I can get the name. I'll just type it in here. Bear with me. Fuse wrap. What does formally utilized sites remedial action program? Those are contaminated sites that are completely different from the EPA sites, which are called the Superfund sites. So if you combined a map of these fuse wrap sites and then if you overlaid them, you would be horrified at how much contamination this government has allowed just to help businesses become mega corporations, mega wealth. It literally is profit over people, which is why we have landed in 2019 with the worst con man ever in the White House, who only cares about money and his own rear end. It is really despicable. You know, we wonder why we have these violent shootings in our country, why we have malicious hate speech and things going on in our nation. This is a long laundry list. It's been a long, slow road. We get the government we deserve. And this is the government we deserve because we have been blissfully ignorant and choosing to turn the other way. We are deciding, yeah, that's really terrible, but there's nothing I can do about it. Yes, there is. And you know what I do? And I suggest all of you do this. Get engaged. Even if you don't vote, contact your elected officials. They don't care if you vote for them or not. You're still their constituent. In fact, they want to win your vote. They want you to start voting because you like them so much. I mean, I think we don't really have a choice but to fight for our future, folks. We only have one planet. This isn't going to be like Astro Boy where we get to go live on the space. Maybe that's what, Elon Musk and his little greedy, horrible monsters, friends of his, all think they're going to do. All the Oprah Winfreys in the world think they're all going to escape to the outer atmosphere while the rest of us live in massive contamination. That's their plans for us. So let me tell you what the fuse wrap site says. The formally utilized site remedial action program was initiated in 1974 to identify, investigate, clean up, or control sites throughout the U.S. contaminated as a result of the nation's early atomic weapons and energy program. Activities were performed by the Manhattan Engineer District or under the Atomic Energy Agency prior to the Department of Energy being formed. Fuse wrap focuses on protecting human health. That is a lie. Public safety and human environment at these sites. That is a lie. Contaminated with low-level radioactive materials throughout the investigation and cleanup phases. Although fuse wrap sites may contain radioactive levels above current regulatory guidelines, none of these sites pose an immediate health risk to the public or environment given current land issues. That just makes me spit nails. Go tell that to the people of St. Louis. who are dying, who have had their little children die. One of the reasons I got involved with this was a Facebook page, to tell you quite the truth. I think it was 2013. I had found out about the Just Moms St. Louis, or was it Just the Facts, Please? The Bridgeton areas. It was Just the Facts. And none of us on the West Coast are really, I'm stuttering for words here because it is so incomprehensible. On the West Coast, we're not even aware that this happens. And in fact, outside of St. Louis, very few people do know that it has happened. The Manhattan Project site, basically all the uranium that came for the Manhattan Project site was processed at a site called Mellencrot in St. Louis. I think they processed over 200,000 tons of uranium to get the bomb and to create their nuclear materials. What they didn't tell us was that they had 4 sites in St. Louis, one in Athens, Illinois, which is right across the river from St. Louis. And then there was a site where they basically buried something like 22 train cars full of uranium, excess uranium. They just buried it in St. Louis out there. And then they had a big gigantic mountain in another site called Weldon Springs, where they used to, when they were processed the uranium, it leaves these little black pellets, kind of like black sand. So they built a big gigantic mountain of black sand in Weldon Springs, where they allowed people to play in that sand. And then in the late 70s, there's a site, because they illegally, when they started to clean up, before they moved the uranium that they discovered they buried after World War II on the Bridgeton area, those 200 tank cars, the citizens realized they were getting really sick, and so they forced the government to start moving those train cars. I think it took them almost 18 years or 20 years to move those train cars. But while they were doing that, somewhere along the line, somebody sold 50,000 tons of that radioactive waste to another agency illegally and dumped it in a fuse wrap site, another fuse wrap site. And that subsequently, because they weren't following their own best practices, started an underground fire, and it is still continuing to burn nonstop in this area called the Westlake Landfill in St. Louis. The Just Moms of the Westlake Landfill moms, because they've all kind of formed 4 separate splinter groups in St. Louis. And the Westlake moms, who are actually still having meetings on a regular basis, one of the women posted a picture of their child sitting in a hospital bed right before she died of cancer. The child was 9 years old. The number of people in St. Louis who have lost children to cancer is immeasurable. Not just cancer, they have diabetes, autoimmune diseases, all the things that John Goffman told us happens when you expose people to ongoing low-level nuclear contamination. When this thing says it does not cause immediate harm, yeah, it takes maybe 5 or 6 years. Some children, I guess when a child is born, it doesn't look like they're immediately harmed. When they're 8, 9, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, they start getting cancer. I guess the government feels like that's worth it, because we can't really spend the money. We can spend the money on bombs. We can spend the money on weapons. But we can't spend the money on cleaning up our environment from the catastrophe of World War II and the Manhattan Project. And we have the nuclear liars out there right now, attempting to make us think that nuclear contamination is clean, green, and safe, that it doesn't use up a lot of carbon, which is a lie. It uses lots of carbon, especially after the plant shuts down. What happens with any nuclear contaminated site? You have to use trucks to clean it up. It really literally is just completely beyond comprehension to me. I honestly don't get it. I just don't get it, man. I just don't understand it. But, yeah. To me, we got to wake up, folks. That's what I think. We got to wake up. And you know, it's not just about being woke, right? Because a lot of people are, quote, woke. What we got to do is be willing to be uncomfortable and get out of our comfort zone, which is why I am doing this podcast live, because I want to get out of my comfort zone. I mean, to me, it's super important that we activate the youth and help them understand how they personally are being contaminated. John Goffman's book, Poison Power, outlined how children, infants, young women, young boys, the youth are the most, I think, well, okay, I've heard Nancy Faust, I think from the Downwinders in what's it, Massachusetts, I think, or maybe it was from Nears. She was talking about how, yes, it was Nears, and it was Diane Arrigolo from Nears. She was talking about how she has discovered that testing, they have shown that nuclear contamination harms infants 10 times more than an adult. 10 times. It causes harm to little girls 5 times as much. To little boys, and I'm talking children under 5, what was it, 4 times as much? 3 times as much. Women, twice as much. So it seems like anybody who has any reproductive things going on, those are the ones that are most contaminated. And the types of contamination that they have shown it causes, nuclear contamination causes diabetes, schizophrenia, not just cancers, diabetes, schizophrenia, autoimmune diseases, and what's the other one? I always forget. There's a laundry list. But these are things that are common in our culture right now. We are literally sacrificing our children so that we don't have to be uncomfortable and not speak out. We are literally sacrificing our future for not speaking out. We're sacrificing our children. Literally, we are putting them on the pyre of nuclear and chemical contamination so that Mallinckrodt, CMH2 Hill, which runs the Hanford nuclear site, so that all of these Exelon, so that these CEOs and executives can make millions of dollars a year, and then so that their 1,500 workers at each one of those plants can make $100,000 a year. We are literally sacrificing our children for the future because of nuclear contamination. And it is a silent, passive killer. In Atate, when they sell that beer, they're getting these microbrews going in Atate, Japan. I just read this the other day. They don't even test it for nuclear contamination when they bring it into the United States. Did you know that? The United States does not test its food for nuclear contamination from Fukushima, Japan. And the United States just signed a trade contract with Japan. So we're going to be exporting food to them. They're going to be exporting food to us. What they have been doing over the last 5 or 6 or 10 years since this accident happened at Fukushima is they take contaminated rice that they've grown and mix it with uncontaminated rice, thinking the solution to pollution is dilution. That's not actually accurate, folks. Because all you need is 1/16 millionth of a gram of plutonium to lodge in your body, and you will get sick. Period. You may not get sick for 20 years, but you will get sick. So, the reason I decided to keep doing this radio show, because this whole year, to be honest, I've really had a hard time. Do I want to do this show? Do I really want to keep talking about this? Because yes, it's out there, but you know what makes me do it? Because there's just really not anybody else doing it besides Libby Halevi and Nuclear Hot Seat. And if you're not listening to Libby Halevi's show, www.nuclearhotseat.com, you are seriously missing out on a wildly entertaining show. I mean, her show is right on the money, man. She rings the bell. I'm going to be playing around with these weird little things here. Since I'm live, I can add in all these weird little things. Earlier, I like this one. Yeah, that's where we're at. That's what it feels like. That's exactly what it feels like. We are in the middle of a storm. You know, we are in the middle of a big storm, folks. And we have got to protect ourselves. And it is our obligation to protect the children. And I keep going back to the children because it is the children who are the most harmed. We have no option. We must take action. So let me get to these fuse wrap sites and let me get to these things because I honestly just can't believe that that there's so much waste sites. There's so many sites around the country. Right here in Oregon, how many sites are there? There are 19 sites in a little tiny state called Oregon. There's one in Chrome, United Chrome Inc. The one that I was very interested, there's several of them here. Hermiston, which is near the nuclear power facilities. Wasco out in the Dalles also. So just listen to the titles of these names, okay? The one that I really was interested in is the one very close to us at the Teledyne Hua-Chang site. And that is where they used to process the nickel to make the nuclear bombs. And let me read to you their summary. And this is straight off of the EPA.gov/super CPAD /Kerr sites. Wow, the way they do this is just, this is the thing. I think if you start to work for the government, you just start getting evil. Because the way they make these links, you could never figure it out. Anyways, you can go to the EPA website and just type in Superfund sites and you'll find them. The one in Albany, Oregon, which is a really podunk little town here, you'd never guess there was a huge dump site there. This site was contaminated by waste, including radionuclides and volatile organic compounds from a metals production plant. These contaminants impacted soil sediments and groundwater. Cleanups took place during the mid-'80s and late '90s. The cleanup combined soil excavation, installation of a system that extracts and treats contaminated groundwater, and land use restrictions. The groundwater extraction and treatment, enhanced by microbial and chemical treatment, is ongoing. You get that? The groundwater was contaminated and it's still ongoing because you cannot reverse nuclear contamination. John Goffman, in his book Poison Power, literally said to the government, I love the idea of nuclear power. It is a great bomb. It's a great deterrent. It is a great effect. But we ought not to use it for personal or even military use until we know what to do with the contaminants, until we know how to neutralize this stuff. Did they listen to him? No. They ostracized him. That's what happened to John Goffman. Back to this article. This is what it says. Wow. This just blew me away. I didn't realize it was this big. The 225-acre Oramet Hua-Chang plant, formerly known as Teledyne Hua-Chang, you notice how they changed it to Oramet so that we don't associate the word Teledyne with it, is located in Millersburg, Oregon. It is one of the largest producers of rare earth metals and alloys in the United States. The site consists of a 110-acre plant and a 115-acre area made up of 4 ponds containing sludges from the plant's wastewater facility treatment facility. I read that backwards. It also includes a 60-acre field where sludges containing radium were used as a soil amendment. What? It also includes a 60-acre field where sludges containing radium were used as a soil amendment. You know what that means? They used the sludge, mixed it up as a soil amendment. Processed waste disposed of on the site contained radionuclides, heavy metals, and chlorinated solvents. Following cleanup, operation and maintenance activities are monitoring and ongoing. What has been done at the site? That's the new subtopic of this update. EPA completed the fourth 5-year review of the site's remedy in 2013, January. It concluded that the remedy of OU1 is protective of human health and environment, and exposure pathways that could result in unacceptable risks are being controlled. So what does that mean? They're not telling us anything. The cleanup of OU2 remains protective of human health and in the environment in the short term. Continued protectiveness of the remedy requires enhancements to the groundwater remedy, collection of additional monitoring data, evaluation of some wells may require replacement, and evaluation for the need for additional institutional controls. EPA deferred establishing a protective statement for OU3 until additional sampling can be effective. I'm going to read that sentence again. I apologize. EPA deferred establishing a protectiveness statement for OU3 until additional sampling can evaluate the effectiveness of the soil remedy. I wonder who gets paid to write these words. How much money do you get paid to make a pile of lies and deception sound acceptable? How is it that our elected official, Pete DeFazio, Jeff Merkley, and Ron Wyden, Kate Brown, our governor, how do they just put this stuff in the back of their head and say, oh, well, they're doing the best they can? Do you know what the diabetes rate is in Albany? Skyrocketed. You know what the child cancer rates there are? Skyrocketed. The schizophrenia, have you guys ever walked through Albany, Oregon? It's kind of scary, to be honest. I don't ever get out of my car when I go there. It is beyond comprehension. This is the kind of stuff that makes my head explode. All I have to do is go to these government websites and read the stuff they're telling us. It's not like they're hiding it. It's all right there. But you know what they know for sure? Nobody's looking. Nobody's taking action. Nobody's reading it. And if you do read it, you go, well, my soap opera's on. I gotta go. That's just good, interesting news. I hope my kid doesn't get cancer. The way people in our country accept getting cancer is beyond revolting. It's kind of like the way people in this country just accept their ill health and unhappy state. I mean, I'm 64 years old and I am shocked by the number of people that just expect to get cancer, expect to stay on pharmaceuticals, pop Valium, pop pain pills all day long because they're living in pain. And yet they continue to eat processed white flour foods, junk food, drink those canned drinks with taurine in them that just squeeze the daylights out of your adrenal glands and cause depression and cause your kidneys to fail. It's beyond comprehension. We know how to keep ourselves healthy and well. Stay off pharmaceuticals, stay off processed food, eat real food that Mother Earth gives us. It's beyond comprehension, the amount of brainwashing that Americans have just accepted. I'm just, honestly, every time I do one of these shows where I am talking live and having to, I pop through the internet so that we can discuss things of urgency. I'm always just nonplussed. I mean, I have not gotten used to it. I've been doing it, as I said, for 5 years. So there is, check out this, the Portland Harbor. Did you guys know that the Portland Harbor is a fuse wrap site? Let's find out why that is. The Portland Harbor is it's actually a Superfund site. It's not a fuse wrap site. Let's just be clear on the language. The fuse wrap sites are for the Manhattan Project dump sites. And the Superfund sites are massively contaminated sites. But I think this is related to the Trojan thing closing down. Let's find out what happened. What is it? What's the site background? The Portland Harbor Superfund site includes an in-river and an upland portion of the lower Willamette River, contaminated from decades of industrial use along the Willamette River. The Portland Harbor Superfund site was added to the EPA's National Priorities List in December 2000. Water and sediment at the harbor site are contaminated with many hazardous substances, including, hold on, I'm going to clear my throat because these are big words. Okay, sorry for the coughing, folks. Including polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PHAs, dioxins, furans, pesticides, and heavy metals. You know what's in those heavy metals? Nuclear contamination. They're not telling you that, but that's what it is. These compounds have been found to be harmful to people and the environment. Health risks at the site are great enough for cleanup to be needed under the Superfund law. The Willamette River is an integral feature of the Portland, Oregon metropolitan area, which is home to over 500,000 people. This is unbelievable. The river provides a critical migratory corridor, rearing habitat for salmon, steelhead, including endangered runs on steelhead and chinook. These areas hold great importance to several tribes as a national and cultural resource. Well, you can kiss that goodbye, folks. This is just beyond comprehension. Portland Harbor pre-remedial design investigation and baseline sampling work. I don't know about you, but just reading this stuff makes me spit nails. I don't know what it's like being on the receiving end hearing me, but I mean, who does this work and isn't a whistleblower 24 hours a day? And in fact, let's just talk about that word whistleblower. We ought not to have whistleblowers. Being a whistleblower ought to be the standard of course, where we hold ourselves to a higher standard, where we don't lie, we don't cheat, we don't harm, cause no harm. We ought to have a Hippocratic oath in every single one of these chemical and nuclear contaminated sites. The only problem is you can't have these sites without causing harm. It is really beyond this. So this was, it says, now available, EPA's comments on the pre-remedial design investigation evaluation report. EPA has reviewed PDI evaluation reports submitted on behalf of the Portland Harbor Pre-Remedial Group and prepared comments with a cover letter. The EPA finds the data collected by the Pre-RD group to be of suitable quality and generally accepted. So let me see if I can click on this and get some of this information. Or are they not going to tell us? So this actually, the EPA released a proposed explanation of significant differences for a public comment period that ended in December 21st, 2018. So they've been really working on this. This proposed that the EPA's plan for changing some of the cleanup levels for the contaminants of concern, carcinogenic polycystic aromatic hydrocarbons, in the selected remedial area, and an updated risk assessment by the EPA's integrated risk assessment system shows that benzopyrene, or BAP, a type of carcinogenic polycystic aromatic hydrocarbon, is less toxic for people who contact or ingest the chemical than previously thought. Oh, great. Doesn't that make you feel good? They've hired some scientists to tell us not to worry about it. This is just unbelievable. We're literally being set up to fail. We're being slaughtered to the slaughterhouse, folks. That's what they're doing to us. I mean, I'm just shocked, to be honest. I just can't get over it. It's to me, it's just beyond comprehension that we even, I don't know, that we are even willing to do this, that we're willing to just keep ignoring it. And I think it's understandable when you really think about it. We are really being assaulted on all sides. When I first started doing this radio show, I used to say that my childhood, it's kind of like with my job, I used to say that my childhood prepared me for doing this work. I grew up in a family of 8 people, and my parents were not mentally well. And it was like living in a prison, and it was quite violent and brutal. It was not a happy childhood. And it has allowed me to face things that are really hard for most people to even face. But that is the state of our nation. Our nation truly is like a battered wife. And we really do not have a battered country shelter to go to. We don't have professionals to help us figure out how to leave the abusers, because the abusers are running the show, as we see daily on the news. I started this with 2 of the big abusers, right? And I'm not giving the Democrats a pass, because they have created this also. I'm not just blaming everything on Traitor Trump. He's an illiterate, disgusting, greedy little pig. He's kind of like Kim Jong-un, but he didn't create the problem. He can only exacerbate it, but he certainly didn't create it. Well, I'm going to end the podcast on this note. I am doing this podcast in the hopes of giving you enough information so that you are like, what? Here, let me try this guy. I think this would work. Yeah, I think that's the spidey sense we got to get going. Like, really? This is what they're doing. I know for myself, when I first learned about Fukushima, I had a come to Jesus moment. I was like, what? I literally, for almost all of my entire life, and I was born in 1955, I genuinely 100% believed our government was protecting us from nuclear and chemical contamination. I thought after the 60s and the early 70s, when the EPA got going and that the Environmental Protection Agency got the rules going, they got businesses to agree that they had a responsibility to humanity, to protect humanity, that we were being protected. It was not until Fukushima blew up and they lied to us for 3 months that there was a nuclear contamination, that there was a nuclear meltdown, and frankly, they're still lying to us. There are 3 nuclear power plants in full China syndrome in Fukushima. They are still pouring water on these plants nonstop, 24 hours a day. That's why they have that, quote, water problem, which they say they're going to be dumping the water in the ocean because you know why? The International Atomic Energy Agency has told TEPCO they don't have a choice, because the whole island of Japan pretty soon would be filled up with contaminated water tanks all over the place. So they're just going to start dumping them, which isn't news anyways. They've probably been dumping them. I mean, most of you don't even realize that what they did with that contaminated dirt that they dug up, they built these incineration facilities and they burnt up all the waste from the tsunami and all the contaminated waste. So nuclear contamination doesn't get burnt up in a fire. It just gets spread around and put into the atmosphere. And again, another reason why the homeless often die of cancer, become schizophrenic, become diabetic, because they are exposed nonstop to nuclear contamination in the rain and in the air and on the ground. Well, we're at the end of the hour, just about, you guys. I want to thank you for listening to my podcast. You've been listening to Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show. And I am going to be continuing to post. And I am going to continue to interview activists. Anybody that'll talk to me on this one, Although I am not going to be interviewing people with wild stories. I recently interviewed somebody that I chose not to air her podcast that we did together because the story was not credible. It was just hearsay. And I am not going to go down a rabbit hole of, I think I'm being tracked. There's lots of activists who are being tracked and lots of activists who have been almost intentionally killed, who barely scrape out of it. But you know what? Those are the heroes. And when people are on that train, it's because they're actually making a difference. But without solid proof, I'm not going to talk about that because we cannot demean the effort of raising awareness that the nuclear industry is deadly. The nuclear industry intentionally has been lying to us. And the nuclear industry has a full throttle stranglehold on every government on the entire planet. And nobody's able to squirm through of it. The only way we're going to do it is when all of us decide we're not going to take it anymore. So I hope this show inspires you not to take it anymore. So I will talk to you next Thursday. I hope to have my interview with Steve Repicki up. He's a climate activist, and I honestly don't remember the name of his organization, so I'll let him say that to you when we interview. And I look forward to scheduling other interviews with climate activists and anti-nuclear activists so that we can create a world movement. And I, for one, am taking Greta up on her movement of protesting every Friday in front of the federal building, or maybe in front of the freeways, and I haven't really decided where I'm going to be going on a regular basis. But I think it's a good idea. I'm going to be standing out. I won't be standing out all day, but I will be standing out. I think I'm planning it from like 2 to 4 every Friday. And I'll just be standing there protesting, silently protesting, I will be getting the nuclear contamination into the climate change conversation, because the climate's collapsing, and I 100% believe that nuclear contamination has had a major role in destroying the microcosms and destroying life on this planet. And when you destroy the microcosms and the microbes on the planet with nuclear contamination, you feed into the destruction of our environment. It just makes perfect sense. So I'm going to end here, you guys. Put your courage feet on. Thank you for joining us, and we will talk with you soon. Thank you for joining the Age of Fission radio show. Please like, subscribe, and share on Spreaker.com or on the YouTube channel nutzforart, nutzforart. Send all comments and ideas to Lonnie Clark at ageoffission@gmail.com. We urge all, especially scientists and politicians, to follow the words of our beloved American icon, Mark Twain. Always do right. This will gratify some and astonish the rest.